Jaime Lannister started out as a dashing knight in shining armor in the HBO series Game of Thrones, but he took a surprising turn in the costume realm on the way to Season 8. That's coming up. Welcome back to Costumeco. If you're new here, I do almost weekly videos analyzing TV shows and movies from a costume perspective. Jaime Lannister might have torn a page out of his father Tywin Lannister's fashion playbook, but it's now been tossed into the fire. From his armored facade to his more leathery looks, Jaime is now writing his own story clothing-wise. Let's explore his fashion journey so far. But before we do that, warning, there are major spoilers for 7 seasons of Game of Thrones and a sneak peek of Season 8. We first meet Sir Jaime Lannister in the Season 1 premiere, Winter is Coming. Jaime was a member of the Kingsguard, an elite group of 7 knights who served as the royal bodyguard and whose duty was to protect the king and the royal family from harm at all times. Costume designer Michelle Clapton stated that in terms of the show armor, this was a challenge as I've never designed armor before. We started with the Kingsguard, which are totally white in the books, but we felt that wouldn't translate well on screen. We worked gold into the design while still keeping the signature white cloak. Clapton added that in the book by George R.R. Martin, the Kingsguard armor is white, and I thought that this would just be too much and too hard to film. We, of course, kept elements of white, such as the cloak, and we used white enamel in the process. So for this reason, the Kingsguard are called the White Cloaks or the White Swords. Costume armor supervisor Simon Brindle stated, I was intrigued by Michelle's initial designs of the Kingsguard and the Lannister Guard. She was looking at Eastern influences, Asian, Indian, unusual references for this sort of thing, which she mixed with recognizable touchstones from Western medieval European armor. Here's a promo picture of Jaime in his armor on the left, and then on the right with Dany in her wedding attire from Season 1. Brindle stated that Jaime's armor contains quite a lot of scale work. King's Landing is a port town, so there's a connection to the sea going on. And we can thank video games and fantasy shows and movies for perpetuating the popularity of scale armor. Matt Easton has a great video on scale armor on his channel, Scola Gladiatoria, so I'll leave that in the description below. Here's a close-up of the leather scale skirt and lower arm vambrace with the scales attached, which look like they have been painted to look like bronze, likely for budget reasons. And you can tell that it's leather because the scales curl up. The scales on the skirt and upper arm are only attached at the top and hang loose, so even if they are meant to be bronze scales, all it would take is one upward thrust with a weapon under the scales and through the backing. Scale armor, or scale mail as it's sometimes called, is an early type of armor where individual scales are sewn or laced to a cloth or leather backing made up of overlapping rows and resembling the scales of a fish or reptile. Another example of this kind of armor on Game of Thrones is the Tully armor worn by both the Blackfish and Edmure Tully. Again, the leather scales hang loose. To give you an idea, here's an example of an Italian shirt of scale armor in the style of lorica squamata, a type of armor used by the ancient Roman military during the Roman Republic. So according to the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, Canada, it's probably dated early 20th century in its present state, but may incorporate ancient elements. While there is no specific dating, these scale elements are thought to have originated from horse armor. This detail of templates, meanwhile, of hammered bronze scale mail armor is 3rd century AD, and it's from Syria from the Roman imperial period. It's from a collection at the ROM in Toronto. And you can see the original drill holes in the plates where it would have been sewn onto the backing and how each plate is attached to the overlapping plate. Here's the sigil of the Kingsguard. I think it's meant to be a crown, perhaps an abstract of 3 swords that is embossed and enameled on the front of the breastplate. And here's a detail of the engravings and enamel on the pauldron or shoulder guard. The engraving on the armor appears to resemble the unas, or runestone style of the Viking Age, characterized by slim and stylized animals that are interwoven into tight patterns. Here's an example of this type of artwork with these carvings on the north wall portal, Unastava Church in Norway. The symbols also look to me like an abstracted triquetra, also known as the Trinity knot, which is an ancient symbol that has been found on Indian burial sites that date back as far as 5,000 years ago. Pictured here is a still by Game of Thrones photographer Helen Sloan, featuring Jaime's sword, dagger, gloves, and his helmet. There was only one time that I can recall him wearing it, and that was in that first scene when he arrives in Winterfell. And here's a close-up of one of the Kingsguard helms from a behind-the-scenes video. This style of helmet is similar to the barbute. The barbute is a visorless war helmet of 15th century Italian design, often with the distinctive T-shaped or Y-shaped opening for the eyes and mouth. The barbute resembles classical Greek helmets and may have been influenced by a renewed interest in ancient artifacts. Here's an example of this style of helmet. On the left is a Corinthian helmet from the tomb of Denda, from a Greek workshop in South Italy 5th century BC, from the State Collections of Antiquities in Munich. And on the right is an ancient Greek bronze Corinthian helmet, circa 650 BC, from the Manchester Museum. Beginning in Season 4, while the breastplate silhouette is the same, the Kingsguard emblem has been altered to an abstracted crown made from 3 swords. All of the enamel and engravings are gone, replaced with a stag antler motif surrounding the crown and decorating the top of the bronze breastplate, and 2 cross swords on the pauldrons. In these pictures in natural light, you can really see the overpainting on the armor, especially around the crown and in the grooves. This style of armor stands as the uniform of the Kingsguard under King Tommen until the episode Blood of My Blood, when the new Kingsguard armor changes, representing the holy alliance between Crown and Faith. Tommen then releases Jaime from the Kingsguard, which was meant to be a lifelong commitment. Alternatively, Jaime wears Lannister armor when called upon in the Westerlands, like we see here in the Season 1 episode You Win or You Die. Simon Brindle stated that the Lannister armor is more militaristic, intimidating, sinister, with a Japanese influence that's quite disarming. I loved the opportunity to work on this series, as you're not tied down to any one period. This was so freeing. Here's Jaime Lannister's armor from an Entertainment Weekly photo shoot. These photos are taken clearly after Season 2 aired, since Jaime has a full beard and his armor is heavily distressed. Jaime's armor is less ornate than Joffrey's, whose armor is just for show and will never see a battle. The lion embossed Lannister armor is likely partially inspired by the set of 16th century French lion armor believed to have belonged to Francis I. This armor is the work of Giovanni Paolo Negroli, who excelled at making decorations in relief adorned in gold and silver inlay. For some context, here is the pauldron or shoulder piece on the left from Francis I's lion's armor, and the pauldron on the right from the Lannister armor. Here is Jaime in the Season 6 episode No One. The cuirass, or breastplate, looks similar to the Japanese lamellar armors of Edo, Japan. Here is an example of a Japanese samurai cuirass, or chest armor, and falds, made up of long riveted horizontal lames and then lacquered to seal it in place. This type of armor is called an ogigawa do. Ogigawa means tub-sided and refers to the tub-like shape of the do. The picture on the right is an inside view of the riveted lames. The red lacquered front cuirass, the color taken from the Lannister sigil, and the brass plates that border the armor are engraved with a pattern. Again, these motifs look a bit like runestone markings. After examining it a bit more, I think that the symbol in the middle looks a bit like an abstract of the Norse Yggdrasil, or Tree of Life. In Norse mythology, it's the frame that holds the universe up, the source of all life, and all realms rest on its branches and roots. Back to the Japanese influence though, the style of engraving also looks like Japanese family crests called kamon or just mon. Historically, each clan had a family crest of its own, and these crests were widely displayed on war flags, armors, and helmets. Most mon designs consist of a roundel encircling a figure of a plant, animal, man-made, natural, or celestial objects, all abstracted to various degrees. And I've mentioned this before in other videos that one of the main concerns that I have with this armor, considering the Lannisters' wealth and access to the best armor makers in King's Landing, is the lack of lower body coverage. And I've given up on helmets altogether because Clapton has stated in numerous interviews that she has tried her best to have them on her principal characters, but it is almost always kiboshed by production. And while we did see Tywin wear the distinctive Lannister helmet back in Season 2, Jaime has never actually worn one in the 7 seasons of Game of Thrones. Jaime continues to wear his house armor until he finally abandons Queen Cersei in the Season 7 finale, The Dragon and the Wolf. Clapton stated in the behind-the-scenes Game of Thrones costumes that Jaime started off with a cape, actually at the feast, but we decided not to go with it, and that underneath his Kingsguard armor he always wears a leather coat, which is asymmetric, and then we have the scale armor on top. He wears it with tan-fitted pants and knee-high boots. The coat is worn closed when under armor and worn open when it's on its own, with a wide leather collar with the red leather facing spread wide open. I've yet to spot a button or dome on Game of Thrones, so Jaime's coat is closed at the waist with one big hook and the collar fastened with leather ties. Here's Michelle Clapton's initial concept art for Jaime's coat. This one is red instead of tan, and as you can see, she originally intended that the scales were attached directly to the jacket sleeves. Tywin and Lancel Lannister also wear coats cut the same way. Jaime's coat has the curved inset panels like we see on all of Cersei's gowns, and more typically in medieval times, it was the gambeson, a linen or wool quilted jacket that was worn under mail or plate armor, but sometimes over mail or on its own entirely. Examples of gambesons are very rare because they would not have survived, but we do have a few pieces in existence. So here are 2 examples. The one on the left is a gambeson of Joan I from the Alberto Sampaio Museum in Portugal, and then on the right a pourpoint of Charles de Blois. A pourpoint is a stuff and quilted doublet worn by men from the 14th to 17th centuries, and it's similar to a gambeson but shorter and more fitted. In the Season 2 episode The North Remembers, because Jaime was captured by the Starks in his Lannister armor after the Battle of the Whispering Wood, he wears a black leather coat faced with maroon leather and matching maroon suede trousers. This costume is heavily trashed, as you can see. Worn in the episode The Lion and the Rose from Season 4, Jaime's coat is subtly different, but essentially the same cut as the other 2 coats. This is worn under the new Kingsguard uniform under King Joffrey with tan pants and boots, making the whole look very monochromatic. The collar is faced with strips of chocolate brown, maybe oxblood red leather, and leather ties, and he's wearing a maroon cravat at his neck. While the cravat is usually exclusively a masculine neck covering, we see it on women in Westeros in Season 8. Here's another leather coat that Jaime wears under his Lannister armor, beginning in Season 6 and into 7. It's very much like Tywin's coats that we saw on him in Season 2, with the laced-on sleeves and the heavy front clasps, except without the stand-up collar. Again, he's wearing the crimson red cravat, and he wears it with black pants. Jaime also gets a new red leather swashbuckling coat, an item of clothing that he'll wear into Season 8. It's a toned down red, again sort of an oxblood red color with matching front buckles. The asymmetrical cut is gone for good. This is a suitable fencing coat pictured here in the episode The Lion and the Rose because the back is laced all the way up to the collar. You have to look closely to see it, and the sleeves are completely detachable. They are only laced around the top, giving him a complete range of movement under the arms. He's wearing it again in the Season 5 episode The House of Black and White, but without the cap sleeves. Again, the waist seam is slightly higher, while his sword belt sits just above his hips. And I love how he tucks his gloves in there when he's not wearing them. This is from Season 6 while returning from Dorne. Here are some close-ups of the details. On the left are these fabulous leather buckles, and then on the right, my personal favorite, are these long straight stitches detail. I have mentioned on numerous occasions that Clapton always manages to level up with all of these little details. In the episode Valar Morghulis, Jaime is freed as Robb's captor, with Brienne in this ragged traveling cloak. Under the cloak, he wears a very ragged tunic over a black shirt. If you look here, you'll see that the collar has a double drawstring. Nearly everyone in the North wears an undershirt like this, even the women. Here's a good example of a pourpoint jacket worn under the tunic, if you remember that it's a quilted jacket that, like a gambeson, is worn under armor. It appears to be bound with leather. And for Jaime's missing hand, a prosthetic was attached to his actual arm, and his real lower arm was CGI removed. Arriving back in King's Landing in the Season 3 finale, almost 2 seasons after his capture, here's a good glimpse at Jaime's costume without the tunic. The pourpoint is very short-waisted with a short skirt, and the sleeves are seamed just above the elbow. His pants, which I think are meant to be his maroon trousers from Season 2, have a leather center front with lacing detail. You won't find a zipper on Game of Thrones. In the Season 4 debut, with newly shorn hair, Jaime gets a new hand fitted by Qyburn. Fast Company states that Michelle Clapton designed it as something Cersei would choose to disguise a deformity that she fears. It's beautiful, ornate, and feminine. And then Clapton told Fast Company that it became the right thing for Jaime. He's not just this sort of brutal, sarcastic, callous man. He actually has a really sensitive, quite interesting side. It was really beautiful in a way. Here's a close-up of Jaime's golden hand and leather bracer. Clapton said of Cersei, she wants to cover something she finds ugly and deformed. It was designed to be beautiful and look like it wanted to caress. Jaime and Bronn are disguised in Dornish armor in the episode Unbowed, Unbent, Unbroken. According to a fashionista interview, Michelle saw some padded velvet armor in Florence years ago that she loved, and it provided the inspiration for this look. Clapton stated that it's built on leather and padding and velvet, and we decided each stud would be a sunburst on the leather piece studded through. It was a nightmare. I just decided it would be a lovely, sensual way of wearing armor. They were very solid, actually. They were very protective. Here's an example of the style of 19th century Indian armor called a coat of 1,000 nails. According to the Royal Armoury in Leeds, the armor pieces are of heavily quilted crimson velvet, decorated with scale pattern and gilt nails, bordered with a narrow chevron design. And while captive in Dorne, Jaime is given a set of clothes similar to the Dornish men's attire of House Martell, the ruling family of Dorne. Frank Dogler, executive producer of Game of Thrones, said, "We went for things that were very loose and very sensual, and were also inspired a little bit by Indian or Persian outfits. Just looking at some of the fabrics that Michelle Clapton chose, they bespeak a world of luxury and sensual pleasure." And Jaime's coat is reminiscent of the Indian choga. The choga is an Indian men's overgarment brought to India in the 16th century. This exquisite Varanasi coat seen here is in stellar condition, considering it dates back to the late 18th century. This display is from the Woven with Silk Rockefeller Asian Textiles exhibit. The coat is made from a gorgeous silk and gold-wrapped thread brocade. And finally, Jaime leaves King's Landing in the Season 7 finale, having ditched his Lannister armor for good. The traveling cloak, by the way, is just like Stannis Baratheon's, although, being generic enough, it was likely repurposed. And then moving into Season 8, with the bloom off the rose a bit, his salt and pepper hair taking over what were once golden locks, Jaime tells Tyrion, "My golden lion days are done." He's outfitted with a practical northern gorget and pauldrons. Gone forever are embossed lion sigils, crimson lacquered lamellars, and white enameled breastplates. He's now just a one-handed foot soldier in the battle for the dawn. To follow up, I have a costumes of Tywin Lannister coming out shortly. But in the meantime, you can watch the costumes of Tyrion Lannister. I'll have more Game of Thrones content coming out during Season 8 and beyond. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you in the next video.